Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Sorry we've been gone for a few weeks, but hey, school's back in session, so I've been really busy doing a lot of educating, other than what I normally educate. Anyway, point being is that I've just been busy, but now I've had a little bit more time, and I decided it was time for me to get back to basics. Something that I've kind of brainstormed about for the last couple of weeks has just been kind of setting up episodes where I can show y'all how to get started with Lychee, open it up, set up a printer, set up your resin, that sort of thing, and kind of walk you through each process, including setting up and slicing a model. And today, for part one, we're going to start with a miniature model and its base. And for the part two, which I'm going to publish both of these at the same time, that'll be a much larger model, kind of giving a demonstration as to both types of setup. So you can kind of see and understand the difference between the two and how you would want to work your workflows differently for a bigger model versus a miniature model. And I'm also going to teach you kind of how to finesse, even smaller printers. So for those of you that are concerned, maybe you're buying one and you're like, man, do I need to get a huge printer? What should I be looking at? In truth, I'm going to show you there's ways to do as much as you can with the smallest printers that you can get. So let's get right into it. All right, here we are inside Lychee Slicer. Again, this is your first time loading it. You're not going to have a lot of things loaded. You're not going to have any printers loaded, anything like that, or files. So you have these test files over here in the corner. These are like essentially test objects, which you can load into the environment, play around with. But the first thing I wanted to just go over real quickly is how to add a printer and resin. This is something a lot of people get stuck on. So you're going to go over to 3D printer. You're going to click on Add, then Resin. Then you're going to choose your manufacturer, choose your printer. Now, what happens if you don't find your printer? Well, then unfortunately, you're going to have to work with another way of exporting your files, um, and it's a little bit more. Not I wouldn't say tricky, but there's some extra steps at the end of the process, which I will go over actually in part two of the this series. So that way I can cover that for you. Essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to export the file as a pre-supported STL and then import it into whatever specific slicer it needs to be imported into to make the printer understand the file. I do know that this is sometimes an issue with very manufacturer-specific printers. Industrial ones are like this; they have their own software. They won't take anything. But for the most part, if you've got a consumer level printer, you should find that Lychee will add it to their list more than likely within, I would say, a few weeks, maybe a month or two of it coming loose. So, you really should never have much of a problem. I've got a couple printers loaded here because I've got a couple different types of printers. Obviously, some of these units I have, some of them I don't have anymore. Some of them, they don't function anymore, but I've had them or have used them in the past. And so a lot of these printers as well, I also set up as dummies or tests to test out different types of resin formulas and different types of setups, things like that. So the reason I have a lot of duplicates here is because of that. Now, once you set up a printer, you're going to want to make sure that your resin is set up. Now, don't be crazy out of the box and try to use some unofficial resin that you have no idea is going to work. If you're buying an Anycubic printer, please, for the love of all that is ever loving in the world, please just go buy some Anycubic Standard Plus 2.0 resin or DLP Craftsman resin or some formula they make to try. I don't recommend their standard resin. It is very brittle and very poor detail. I recommend anything above that. Standard Plus, ABS like 2.0, which is really nice. Some of their level 2 resins and their DLP resins, awesome. I love all those. I do not recommend their standards, but I do not recommend going crazy and running out and getting like Soriatec and some of their most expensive resins, or going and buying like frozen aqua resin right off the bat either. Now, if you went out and you bought a DLP printer, please use the DLP resin that is meant for it. Most other resins are not going to work as well, and you will find yourself wishing that you had just stuck with the DLP resin. So aside from that, you want to make sure that you set up a resin profile. So by default, Lychee will create a default profile. There's going to be a default profile here, and we can look at that. And that's going to have the default settings that are specified by the manufacturer. At least this is what they're supposed to put in here. Now, you can double check this on the manufacturer's website. There's usually a support section, and they have all that information listed for you. So please refer to that when you are setting up your printer. The only thing I recommend changing from the default is I always set up a light delay of about 1.5 or 2 seconds on any kind of resin. I don't care what it is. Otherwise, your time here, your layer thickness, your exposure times, initial layer burn, all that is great. You don't need to change anything. The only thing I'm going to suggest changing right here, light off delay. Add that 1.5. You'll thank me later. And once you click OK there, you can go ahead and close out of the printer box, and that's going to bring us back to our workboard. Now, we're looking at the Photon Mono 2. I'm going to go ahead and switch this over to one of my other printers that I normally use, which is my X2. And I'm going to switch it to one of the resin settings that I have down here, which is my 50 micron DLP resin setting. I'm going to go ahead and open that. Now, this is a big build plate, so we got a lot of room. So when you're ready to import a model, and a lot of folks get into this because they want to do minis. It's like the biggest reason people get into especially resin printing. They're like, I want to do miniatures. And that is actually probably one of the more popular, if not the most popular thing that people do get into resin printing. So we're going to start with a miniature. This is Ifrit. This is a Crippled God Foundry file. Now, their files do come pre-supported, and for the most part, if you can understand how to import their files and make them work, you probably won't have much of an issue with their files. You do need to check for islands on your particular printer setup, and we're going to get to that part in just a little bit, because I have a little trick that I use for my islands, and it's a little trick that's going to save you a lot of struggle and pain later, trust me. Now, these are miniatures, so we don't want to use big, heavy supports, and you're probably thinking, what the heck is a support? Because if this is your first time using a slicer or a 3D printer, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Supports are things that help the object print off the build plate, because everything has to touch something. So you're going to be pulling off little tiny sticks, essentially, off of your model, kind of like sprue rods, but there's going to be a heck of a lot more of them, and so we need to be very conscious as to how we add them to the model. Now, this cool Ifrit model has like these 4 arms. She's got these cool like swords, horns, wavy hair. So there's a lot of things sticking out, or what we refer to as overhangs in 3D printing. Now, these swords are all overhangs. The cape is an overhang. I mean, technically, these feet are overhangs, but that's okay because we need some base to start from when we build her print. Now, some people will probably mention that there's ways you can save on resin by hollowing. Miniatures do not need to be hollowed. Now the first thing we're going to go over here is we're going to go over orientation, because that's very important. Now, as you notice, I've been kind of tweaking these as I've been talking to you, and I haven't really mentioned why. You're probably going, what's he doing? Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually moving them into orientation. That's going to work the best for printing. Now, when I show people this trick to get orientation right, everyone loves it. So orientation for a base usually going to be between 45 degrees and 53 degrees. And the reason I do this is because that stepping method right there is going to be the most detail level, and you're gonna have the least amount of problems. That's why I recommend doing it like that. It's a good tilt. You'll build up nicely. It's not going to take up too much suction or pull forces, essentially, as it pulls away from the FEP when it prints. For those of you who aren't aware of the mechanical bit of the resin printer, when the build plate comes down, it essentially cures onto a piece of plastic that's clear. And then when it pulls away from that piece of plastic, it'll stretch a little bit. But essentially what needs to happen is the build plate needs to win the tug of war, and the piece needs to come away onto the build plate. Now, the best way to do that is to have the smallest chunks possible render at a time, because that'll make it easier for the build plate to win that tug of war, and it'll make it a lot easier on you and your support building as we kind of build on the different levels of supports. And we'll get into all of that. I'm going to support completely this model so you all can see exactly how that is going to be done. So the first thing, like I said, is orientation. So if we get into the orientation here, essentially what you've got is we put the base here at about a 45 degree angle. Actually, I'd put that at 43. So we'll put that back to 45. So a 45 degree angle. And then she is at about a negative 26 degree angle backwards here. And I'm going to leave her there. But this trick I'm going to teach you is going to save you orientation time. Take a look at the shadow. See the shadow down here? Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to move the orientation of your character in such a way that her shadow is going to get as small as possible. And I think that is probably because some people will lay them flat like this, and then you're going to wind up with all kinds of supports on their back. I don't recommend that. I mean, you could try it, but not my. That's not my method. I move them until I get the least amount of space being taken up by their shadows. So there's that. Now, but I don't like necessarily the fact that her face might get hit with some support. So we are going to tilt her back a little bit, and we're going to take up a little bit more room, and then we're just going to kind of like jolt her this way, so she's more standing straight up. And that's a pretty good orientation. So now would be a good time to go ahead and save your file. And you can name it whatever you like. Just make sure you save it in a place where you're going to remember. And then that LYS file there, that's a portable scene file. You'll be able to move that, take it with you if you want to work on your laptop or some other device. And you don't even need the STL files. The LYS file, the scene file, will contain the data for your STLs. So you can just take the LYS file, which is usually a lot lighter. So once you got your orientation down, you're probably thinking, well, now what? Okay, well, now what is going to be actually pretty simple. We're going to go to the next tab over here up top, which is called Prepare. So once you're in your Prepare tab, we're going to go ahead and highlight both characters by clicking them and holding Shift to highlight them both. Or you can equally just go up here and say Select All. Then we're going to go down here to the second tab on your left menu over on the side, and that is going to be the Raft menu. Now, the raft menu has a lot of options, all of which are fine, but since we're doing miniatures, I highly recommend using the shape wall because it gives you a little bit of a platform here to put your knife under when you're popping them off your build plate, which makes it a little bit easier, and you probably won't fling them halfway across the room. As sometimes these little thin ones will cause problems like this because it doesn't really give you too much to leverage on. You might wind up pushing too hard and then you pop it across the room. Now you can do the big square ones like these. Those are also good. But my advice would be to make it a little bit larger so they actually completely touch each other. So you make like one big raft like that. And then what you could do is you could actually make the thickness slightly thicker than your support base tips. And that's a nice thick 1 millimeter piece. It's got a little bit of a beveled edge there. So that would work too. For my intents purposes, though, I'm going to go with my shape wall because I really like the shape walls. They use less resin, and they're pretty accurate for popping your things off, and you don't have to worry about it. So once you set your raft up, make sure the override base is turned on, and go up to your support menu again. Now, once we're at our support menu, one of the things I'm going to note is that I have a special trick for checking islands, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click over to your auto tab. Yes, we're going to talk about auto supports. So on this, I want you to turn off everything except for auto lift. Although I already have lift on import on, I just want to make sure that your stuff gets lifted properly, which is at least 5 millimeters off of the plate. You're also going to want to come over here to the structure tab and you're going to click snap on grid on. Now, if you don't have the structure tab, and I'm not sure if this is a pro paywall feature or not, but if you don't have it, obviously don't worry about this. You can still use normal bracings. At least I think you can, but you might have to do them manually. Anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. So make sure your structure is turned on. I have my own specific support bracing set up down here, but for the purpose of this, we're just going to use small object bracing because that's good for minis. And then we're going to click back over to auto, and I'm going to click generate automatic supports. And I actually might need to adjust this because I think I chose the wrong size of support. Well, actually, we're going to use two different sizes anyway. But you see, it actually does a fairly decent job of supporting some of the areas that are going to be more important, and we'll get to that in a minute. But hang on, we need to adjust this. So because she's a mini and has lots of delicate parts, I'm going to use my sublight supports, which are these settings over here you'll find on the side. If you want to write that down, go right ahead. These are not the default Lychee settings. These are my personal settings. That's the tip diameter, the tip length, and the diameter of the bar. I'll go ahead and wait here a second so you can write that down if you want, or go ahead and pause the video, whatever you want to do. But regardless, go ahead and jot that down. I do often put this in the description of my videos, but I haven't been keeping track of whether or not that information is still accurate as to what I use because I've changed a few types of my support types, but for general intents purposes, it's mostly accurate to what I'm using currently. Now for her, we're going to go ahead and click the automatic again, and I'm going to let those create those, but we're using these lighter supports now. Okay, there we go. That's a little better. Now we're going to switch over to the base, and I'm going to go back to my sub-mediums, which are a bit thicker, and we're going to generate automatic supports. Now, we're not done. Don't get me wrong. Not by far. Now, one of the first things we're going to learn is we're going to learn about something called support projection, which is actually a really good way to support bases. So you're going to click on your base, and we're going to go over to Manual, and we're going to go down to Start Support Projection, which is going to be at the very bottom. Now, for your method, you can either paint like that, which will just paint the whole darn thing, or you can use the surface crease tool or the surface angle. I prefer surface crease. That way you can just simply click the surface crease you want to support. See, nothing on the front. Then we're going to click on this button that says Preview Supports, and now we can adjust some things. So the interval is the distance between the supports together, and you can kind of get an idea how that's going to look based on the little grid that is appearing on your base. So I want them pretty tight, like that's good. I'm also going to make sure that I have a border and an infill, and they're both going to be at the same interval and size, which is fine. And then we're going to say, go ahead and add the 372 supports, and wham. Now that is pretty much done. I actually won't do anything much else to this base except for check for islands, and we'll get back to that in just a second. For now, I'm going to go over to my little object menu, and I'm going to hide it to get it out of my way. Now, if we come back over to this, Ifrit definitely still needs some more work. But in order to really get in there and see it, you're going to need to turn these supports off because they kind of get in your way. My suggestion is go over to the visibility and change it to contact only, but keep the lines on so you can still see where the support lines are going, and it gives you a better idea of how crowded you're getting in your workspace. So unfortunately, the next part of the process, there's no real easy way to get around it. But what you're going to have to do is check for islands and then kind of support each part of the model as we go. So in order to do this, I'm going to bring the shield back on by clicking the little eyeball again, and then I'm going to select both objects. And for islands, I often will use a larger support type than I do for the standard support. So for all the islands, we're going to use a 0.20 tip diameter combined with a 3.20 length and a 1.20 diameter bar. Then we're going to go over to this little tab here that says Island, and we're going to click on Search. Now, you want to make sure that your search is turned all the way up to real. Do not leave it on fast, normal, detailed. Go all the way up to real. I don't care how long it takes you. This is going to be the best way to prevent failed prints or failed parts. Now, once you click Search Selected, this process can take a little bit of time, depending on the size or height of the print. For these little guys, it should not take too long. We'll go ahead and click it and see how this goes. It's actually pretty quick given the fact that they are kind of small. Okay. Now it's going to search the other object now. Excuse me. And there we go, 48 islands total, and we're going to look through each one of those separately. Now, we did this island check at 50 microns, which is going to be my printing height for these models. I could print them at 35, which I do sometimes for some of my customers because, hey, some people like a little extra detail, and 35 microns will definitely get it for you. Now, as you can see, there are little red specks that have kind of appeared on the model. These are where the system has identified islands. An island in 3D printing is a part of the print that appears with absolutely nothing to support it, meaning it's floating out in the resin. So it's an island, like this toe over here, for example. As we can see, this toe doesn't join with anything right away, and it's just kind of floating there. So if we don't support this, this toe is never going to make it. Now, the fun thing is Lychee makes this really easy, and you can simply click this button that says add support to all islands. And in most cases, this actually works pretty well. And to save you a lot of time, I certainly recommend using it. However, I do recommend looking at the islands themselves and making sure that you feel like they are actually well supported. For example, even if we were to place one support there, is that really going to be enough to support that entire section of resin while it's creeping up out of the vat? Probably not. But you don't want to stick a bunch of very large supports on top of one single section, as you might risk chipping or damaging the detail. However, this is the bottom of a foot, and I don't think it's that important. My suggestion would be to add two supports, one right next to each other, both about the same size, so that way you have some double support there. And I can do this on each toe. That will better support that entire foot from its starting positions, giving your resin a little bit more time to build up, so that way you don't run out of resin on the actual when it doesn't pancake essentially. Because what'll happen is otherwise that one support's going to pick it up, it's going to flippy flop, piece of it's going to fold over, or something's not going to cure right, and you're going to wind up with a pancake toe, or you're going to wind up with something that's not quite formed. You could even go up here and add smaller supports on the very, very top, and say, like, put a couple of the .15s up here next to them, because these tips are so small, they're just going to pop right off. That's not going to cause any damage. And again, we're on a foot. This is the bottom of the character. You're not going to see it. Now, the other thing you're going to notice I'm doing here is I'm putting supports around the perimeter of her foot, which is actually the smartest way to support stuff. Perimeter support is intelligent. Now, I know you're probably thinking, you just did auto support. Why are you adding more supports? Well, auto support is never quite enough. Now, y'all were asking, or I was mentioning rather, about my island trick. And I've done this in another one of my videos before, but it's been a while. And I figure for the basics video, maybe it's a bit too advanced, but I think everybody needs to know this trick because I think it's important. And it's not really a trick. It's more of just you're changing resolution, so the software has to adjust. So when we did our island search, we checked these islands at 50 microns. If I was to adjust my print height, meaning I'm going to go to 35, the islands it would find would actually increase. So let's go ahead and we'll support the rest of all these islands here real quick. If it can't support anything automatically, go ahead and get in there and do it yourself. Usually just a matter of sticking a support in one or two places. Not overcomplicated. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to go over here where we set up, well, actually we set up our printer up here. You're going to go over here where your printer is in the corner. Click on it. Now, as you saw before, I have multiple resins set up. Most printers by default will usually come with one. It's usually set at 50 microns because it's the most default thing that people print at. Still, if you want to set up copies of your resin to do this trick, it's very easy. You're going to start with your 50 resin. You're going to edit it. And you're going to click this up here to create a copy. When you do that to create a copy, it's going to open a new profile. In that profile, you're going to adjust one thing only, layer thickness. Now, I have mine set to millimeters. If you have yours set to it's going to look a little different, but essentially just in millimeters, it's 0.035 or 0.050 or 0. Whatever. That's how you do it. If you're doing it in it's 50, 35, and then I also add two more at 20 and then 10. Because some printers now can actually go pretty low, so I'm checking islands at even lower layer heights than I was before. And the different ones look like this. And like that. And what I'll do is I will switch. Now, I don't always check everything at 10, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to go all the way to 10. So I will switch to my 10 micron resin, and then I will search again. Now, it's not going to be as quick this time because we're searching at 10 microns, which is very, very thin layers. So the software has to now try and look even harder. This print probably has like 10,000 layers in it at this point. and it's going to take even longer. Anyway, we're going to cut back with a short edit, and then we'll finish with the rest of the model. All right, here we are. We did the island search here. There were no additional islands at this level, so we would go ahead and then do this for each particular layer height, searching as we go up from 10 to 50. Now, we already did 10, and we've already done 20. So 35 and 50 will be relatively quick. And I think we already did 50 at the beginning anyway. So we'll go ahead and check now that we've added all of our supports, and we'll get on to the all-important proximity and final checks so you can go ahead and get these prints going. Oh, and we'll also talk about bracings and different ways you can go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and keep adding the supports. Does not ever want to seem to just do it without my help. Most models you won't have that issue. Seems to be this particular one has a lot of nooks and crannies that Lychee doesn't like. All right, and once again, we'll go up to 50. This is going to take like a minute. Look at that. Wish they were always that fast. Fortunately, minis are pretty quick with island searching too because they're so short. The island searching really depends on the height of the object and how many layers. It's really the major thing. So no additionals. We'll check for proximity issues, if there are none. And then we're going to go over to structure. So now we're going to take a look at the bottom of the base first. This is the most important part, and then this base will pretty much be ready to go. Now what you want to do is you want to make sure your first contact with the supports is really good. So take a look down here. Let's take a look how many little support pegs we've got. This strip right there is too weak in my opinion. This is going to fail. A little bit's going to fail. So we're going to go ahead and add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, up to about, I'd say, there. Because as we come up, the border that we've already got in place will start to take over. But what you want to make sure is that the edge of your base is getting printed. So if you see there's a tip that's a little too far off, grab it, drag it. If you see it's way far off, don't do that, but you can add them as you want to go up. Then once you get about 3/4 of the way up, you don't have to worry about it too much. It's going to rely on the piece underneath it, and those supports aren't going to do as much. Once you get to about here, you're pretty good. The rest of it should pretty much build itself and should build pretty well. Now for the Ifrit character, are we done? I mean, we did the feet. Like I said, you're going to do, perimeter around the feet. Then you're going to want to go and take a look at any island that you have supported. And you're going to want to say, okay, does this need another support? Do I need to add up more on these? And as you do that, just make sure that you're not adding too much weight on supports. That's going to break the model when you go to remove them. All right, as long as you've done the island checks the way I demonstrated 90% of the time, you're going to have a really good time with the auto supporting, the right type of support, and then, like I said, structure. So in this, now if you are using Lychee Pro, I believe you have access to this structure. I don't know if this is a free option or not. If it's not, again, it's one of those features that's just really awesome. You should totally get Pro for it. And no, I'm not getting paid to say that, so don't think so. Anyway, I might be a Lychee ambassador, but they don't give me any money for that. The snap on grid, turn it on, or if it isn't already, make sure it's on. Interval set to 5. Search for ground 1. And then we just want to make sure everything is parented right now. So we want to go to our presets. Now I have my own preset called mine. This is for minis. I use this for minis all the time. It has a slightly smaller bar that goes in between. You'll see what I mean. Now, alternatively, you can make bracings yourself. You click a bar, and then you add another bar by holding Shift. It's going to go up to the top. You can create lattice structures of your own. As long as you got to hold down Shift the whole time. If you let it go, it's going to stop. And there you go. There's a manual bracing. Now you want to go back the other direction, cross it. This is a very, very rushed lattice cross. This looks terrible. I would not actually, but I'm just giving you an idea. So there's a crazy lattice that I made. Definitely would be strong, but I wouldn't advise. Wouldn't advise. This is a lot of resin you're going to be using there. Let me just get rid of these. But that is one way you can do it if you want to do them manually. And some people really like doing their own, uh, lattice work when they're talking about doing bracings. Me, I have embraced the grid system. Works really well. I love it. So for me, we're going to go choose my preset, and then I'm going to just add update. And that is going to create a beautiful grid frame bracing system around my model. I'm going to do the same thing here. And again, beautiful grid system. Looks clean, looks awesome, is super easy to remove. And as long as you have supported your islands, you're golden. You're good to go. So go ahead and save your scene at this point. And then again, want to check for things like proximity. That's important. Make sure that no supports are cutting through the model. And then we're going to go over to the export tab. Now, there's a couple things we can talk about here, like anti-aliasing. My suggestion for small minis, go with smooth surfaces, 2 pixels and 30%. I don't recommend using the high definition aliasing at all. And the anti-aliasing on support, I recommend keeping off as well. You can try the new fast slicing, which is in a beta if you're using the new system. And you can try that, which will allow the slice to run, I say, a little bit faster. So if you do it that way, I'll demonstrate that, and you can see how that's going to work. The other method takes, I would say, double the speed of the fast slicer. We'll go ahead and save this. All right, and now this is going to clean up, and we should get the finish done. Now this, I don't know why this doesn't show me the proper information for some reason, but there you go. Slicing finished. Going to be 5 hours, 14 minutes, 33 seconds at 50 printing. And should use what I'm sorry, I missed the resin volume part because it doesn't say it. Should use an estimate of 22.35. Looks like we're using even amount of resin on the support and the minis themselves. So pretty cool there. There you go. That's how you set up and slice a model in Lychee. That's how you export it and everything, even setting up a printer. As promised, we will cover more in our next part 2, which I'm releasing both these at the same time. So hope to see you guys in part 2. Hope this was educational. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.